All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. So just a quick reminder, we do have our midterm exam coming up in class on Thursday. So it's going to be multiple choice, very, very similar to the homeworks that you have been doing. The multiple choice that I'm going to pull from chapter 7, which we're covering today, will be multiple choice from the Kahoot that we're going to do at the end of class. And then we'll have, like I said, a couple of graphs, which will be no more than 20% of your final, of your midterm exam grade. That makes sense, everyone? So we have an hour and 15 minutes on Thursday. Just come with a pencil. I will have scrap paper. I will have Scantrons. I will have the exams. Bring a calculator if you want. Bring a calculator. Bring a calculator. Any questions on exam? Okay, awesome. Well, let's jump right in since we've got chapter 7 to get through today, right? So we're going to talk first about producing things in the short run. So we left off in class just getting some common foundation in terms of what is total revenue, what's total cost, what's profit, that kind of stuff, right? So we got that baseline set of definitions, so we're all on the same page. And now we're going to be talking about production in the short run. And specifically, to talk about the short and the long run, we have to separate our production factors, right? And so we have these things called factors of production. Why and how are things actually made, right? And so the resources that firms use to produce products are these factors of production. And the resources are as follows. We have natural resources, which is going to be all your land and raw materials. We have labor. We have capital. And here I want you to understand there's a very different definition of capital in economics and in finance. In economics, when we're talking about capital or a purchase of capital, we're not talking about buying a stock or buying a bond, right? We're talking about buying a piece of machinery, buying a desk, buying a computer, buying something that is crucial to the actualizing of the business, service, or good. So it's not just a financial transaction, which is what we oftentimes equate capital with financial transactions. But in here in economics, just like we have accounting profit and economic profit, when we're talking about capital in economics, we're talking about resources deployed for the purposes of producing some good or service. The way in which those resources are deployed and the way in which the labor interfaces with the resources, that's our technology, right? Are you going to be using typewriters? Are you going to be using smartphones? Are you going to be using computers, printers, fax machines? What's the particular technology? Are you going to be, using a centralized server? Are you going to be using a distributed kind of situation, right? So the technology is an important bit in terms of our factors of production. And then last but definitely not least, we have to put all this together in some way, right? It's not as if all of these resources come together organically in order to create stuff. There needs to be somebody or a group of people that are whipping these people into shape, setting an agenda, setting priorities and strategies, and making sure that those priorities and strategies are being done. We have entrepreneurship. So the actual management and how the business is run. So we put all of these things together in order to get what we call a production function. So in a similar way that we had, y is equal to some generic function of x, right? Where f of x could have been, x squared, 2x, I don't know, x to the third plus x squared plus x plus 5, right? Could have been all sorts of different things. But the key part here is a function containing one input or argument named x, all right? So similarly, but expanding on that, we're going to have production function as a q, and that's equal to, again, an f, a function of, but instead of just one single variable, now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? We have natural resources, we have labor, We have capital, which is always abbreviated with K. Harkens back to the German origins of economics. Capital is spelled with a K in German. And then we have T for technology, and we have E for entrepreneurship. So all of these things come into play. In terms of what's the actual functional form for this, your guess is as good as mine, right? That's something economists have been trying to figure out forever. So there's all sorts of different competing beliefs in terms of which one of these factors is the most important. We can figure out some stuff if we can figure out some stuff if we simplify this to just being labor and capital, right? So it's easy for us to measure labor and capital. Difficult for us to measure the technology in the same kind of apples to apples way, right? Difficult to measure entrepreneurship. It's a very amorphous, vague kind of thing. And difficult to measure natural resources, right? It's easy to measure when natural resources erode and are no longer gone, but it's hard to actually value natural resources in terms of their just anything, right? The dollar value of natural resources, right? Like we try to do surveys to be like, how much would you pay to still be able to go to the parks? But that's not even that great of a measure, right? So if we simplify it, then we end up getting, and this isn't on the test, this is just for your knowledge here. And let me just make sure I'm not telling you lies. One second. Of course, I'm having the toughest time here actually finding this. Okay, got it. So if we take our most popular production function, which is called the Cobb-Douglas production function, we simplify it to just being the capital and the labor, and it ends up being a quantity is equal to some factor times labor to the 2/3 capital to the 1/3. So this is a version of a production function. So again, we don't need to actually know this for the test, right? But I just figured, that was interesting for some of you that are wondering, well, why is it this general thing? Why don't we have an actual explicit form for the production function? Well, we do once we simplify things to just becoming about labor and capital, and we assume the rest away. Which leads us nicely into our shorthand formula for the production function. So the shorthand formula for the production function is as followed. Yes, we all know that there are 5 elements that go into it, but our shorthand version is just going to be looking at those elements of labor and capital, those elements that we can easily, apples to apples, make some comparisons with, right? We pay laborers in dollars, we buy capital with dollars, so at the end of the day, we can value both of these things in dollars, unlike technology, entrepreneurship, and natural resources. When we are talking in this shorthand form of production functions, we are going to be talking about fixed and variable inputs. And for the most part, our capital is going to be our fixed inputs. And when we talk about fixed inputs, we're saying these are inputs that can't easily be increased or decreased in a short period of time. And in a short period, we also talk about in the short run. And we're going to get to a more technical definition about that in a second. But as you can see, these things are inextricably linked to each other in the same way that exponents are logarithms, right? So capital is going to be our fixed inputs for the most part. Labor is going to be our variable inputs. Again, for the most part, there are always exceptions, right? So our variable inputs are labor, and these are things that can easily increase and decrease in the short run. Start to use that lingo there, right? So any questions on our production function and the simplification of the production function to our shorthand form, and then the jump to then assuming that capital goods are fixed and labor is variable, right? You can easily adjust labor. I mean, sometimes you have contracts or there's a union or something like that, right? So that's why I said, you know, most of the time. But if we think about like hourly employees, right, those can be easily, you know, decrease the amount of hours that you have them working. You could put some people as part-time instead of full-time. You could fire some people, right? With capital inputs, though, you know, sometimes you bought something and you're stuck with it. You have to pay it off. You could try to sell it and recoup the money that you still owe on it, right? But a lot of times, as soon as you buy something, the value of it decreases significantly in terms of its resale value. So you might not be able to get out from under it and still be able to recoup those costs, right? So capital, it's a little trickier. You can't easily adjust it in the same way that you can with labor. Okay, last little part of this, and then we get to a more technical part. So I talked about the short run, or in the short period, right? Let's go ahead and get some explicit definitions in our notes about this. So when we're talking about the short run, we are talking about the period of time during which at least some factors of production are fixed. So in the short run, some of the factors are fixed. In the long run is the period of time where at least, or sorry, not at least, where all factors are variable. So we can adjust all of the factors in the long run. We can, the short run is defined that at least some of the factors are fixed and unadjustable. So short run is not a matter of weeks, months, years. It's a contextual definition for the problem at hand, or the query at hand, or the economic issue at hand. It has to do with what are the moving parts and how long will it take for all of the parts to be movable, to be adjustable. So the long run is defined in the context of whatever economic problem you're trying to solve. So